Right, shall we make a start? Bev's subtly cued me into me introducing it by sitting over there and hiding, so I'll make a start. Right, good morning, thank you for coming. It's nice to see so many people. Welcome, obviously, as always, to Learn Sheffield. I won't read through all of those, but I think you know all that information already, and you'll have a chance to have a look as we've gone through. Our agenda today, we've got Tim Armstrong, who'll introduce in a second, coming to talk to give us an update on SEND. We're talking about the primary achievement strategy this morning. We've got a Learn Sheffield update with various bits and pieces in there, and then a quick input around the new interactive RAISEonline, and talking about some familiarisation sessions that we've got coming up for that. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Tim. Tim's head of SEN, is that the right title? Head of SEN, new to Sheffield in the last few weeks, and from my perspective, and I'm going to embarrass you slightly, a breath of fresh air. So,
oh, that's always good. No pressure at all. There you go. So this, hang on, no, this is where I was told I should have practiced beforehand. There we go, get the right direction. Hello, so I'm, as has been said, I'm Tim Armstrong, and I've just started in post at the end of March as head of SEN, and welcome to Sheffield is all I generally am getting at the moment. There's a huge challenge ahead of us, and we need to not... There's an instant response. We need to be very mindful of that. Just so that you're aware, so my team is the team that is trying to get through writing EHC plans and converting statements to EHC plans, and I'm also doing a load of the work around the SEND strategy and a whole bunch of other things, and all the commissioning of placements and post-16 and stuff like that. It's a fun job. It's a small job, big challenge, but there we go. I've actually just, I've lived in Sheffield for a long time. In fact, it was quite nice. I was talking to my kids' head teacher, which is always good. But I've been working in Wakefield for the past 10, 11 years. And in particular, I've spent the past 3 years managing the SEN team there. What I recognise is that actually the challenges for schools, for services, for parents, for young people, for local authorities over the past couple of years, with the government bringing in the SEND reforms with the Children and Families Act, have been enormous, and can't be underestimated as to how big the task and the challenge was that government was asking. So the first thing I wanted to say is actually thank you, because I know schools are working really hard to try and meet the needs of children and young people who've got additional needs. I know that schools are trying to put everything they can in place, and I know that actually it's not always been managed and done as well as it could have been in terms of the information and support that schools are getting, particularly around some of the statutory processes. So I was asked to come and talk on moving from the old SEN system to the new. Now that's quite a broad thing, and I said, could you, a bit of clarity, a little bit of understanding, what exactly? And we thought, just that as a general thing. So apologies if this isn't what we wanted this morning, but I thought let's go through the general stuff, and let's also look at the specifics of the Children and Families Act and the reforms and changes that we've got to put in place. And I'm going to try and keep to time, but I reckon, Stephen, you need a clock on that wall to help people. That would be something for the future. If I start coughing. Then that's fine. So, background, Children and Families Act came in 2014. That was the biggest changes in a generation. Statements were about 1980, 1981. It took about 3-4 years for them to get embedded. And actually a big criticism of statements were that they were short documents that weren't specific, didn't detail needs, weren't joined up with health, weren't joined up with care, weren't joined up at all, didn't talk about the pet that put the young person at the middle. And the idea of the SEND reforms is that all of that is all going to change, and has all changed, so that we are moving into the world of education, health and care plans. This statutory legal document that includes much more joined up working around education, health and care. And straight away, I know you're all going, yeah, but getting someone from health to a meeting and care, what does that look like? And all those sorts of things. And let's not even go there on budgets, because I'm sure those are some of the key questions in your head. Anyway, some of the key things that I think we need to be thinking about in terms of that big picture, and I'm not sure we've necessarily articulated in Sheffield well enough yet, is about the graduated approach towards meeting needs. A lot of the focus of the SEND reforms has, because of the move from statements to EHC plans, been about what are we doing for the 2.5% of our population, roughly, whose needs are classed as high needs and need an EHC plan. That means if the rough data is about 13% of our population are at SEN support. And so what are we doing about them? How are we addressing that? Are we able to manage that and manage that well? Because what the Code of Practice, the SEND Code of Practice and the Children and Families Act is all about is saying it shouldn't be about what you do, chuck it in at the high level. It should be what are we doing at the earliest possible points to identify, assess, understand and meet children and young people's needs. And that's a massive challenge because I know that Senko time is limited. I know that budgets are limited. I know that the time that teachers have to plan and differentiate their work is limited. I know all of that. But that's essentially the challenge that we've got. Not just dealing with the top end, but dealing all the way through the process with SEND. Two key things as part of that bigger picture. One is person-centred. The old system used to be professionals providing reports and telling you what it's supposed to be about. The new system for SEND is supposed to be about the young person at the heart of everything, which I know as schools that's what you try to do anyway. Working with the parent, working with everybody as that team around that young person to hear their voice and really articulate the young person's voice, whatever their age, whatever their needs, and hear the impact on their family and ensure that we're meeting their needs in a way that works for them. The other key thing is co-production, which is an interesting line, but essentially it means working with parents to understand our systems and to produce what we're doing with a young person. It's no longer an intention of you provide a parent a report and say, yeah, here's the plan of what we're doing with Jimmy. And if you ever hear me talk again, you'll hear me talk about Jimmy all the time because I always use Jimmy as a name. I don't know why, but there you go. But here's the plan that we're doing with Jimmy. This is what we're doing and that's how it's working. But the idea is that there's co-production with parents about to hear what is it that's going to make that difference, both in an individual and on a system-wide level. So the big picture is huge. There's massive changes there, and hopefully this isn't new to you. There we go. So what I wanted to partly talk about today was assess, plan, do, review, that graduated approach. Because the SEND reforms is about these key things. And this is about from moving from our old to our new, this is about all our children and young people who have got SEND in any form, whether it's SEN support or EHC plan. One of the key criticisms parents had was that they're constantly telling professionals and people their story. You know, you could walk up the garden path one day and then somebody else would do it the next day. All of our systems should support a tell us once approach. What we're doing in school, what we're doing in EHC plans if we're there, my plans, whatever it would be, it should be supporting that. It should be supporting that learner and parent involvement so that they are part of it. That graduated approach, as I've talked about, to meeting a young person's needs. How are we doing things at the start? And so one of the key things that all services and schools should be looking at is saying, right, how are we assessing the current needs? What's our plan? Let's do it. Let's review what's working, what's not working. And we go into another cycle of that all the time to try and assess what we're doing, what's working, how we move things forward. I've talked about person-centred practice, but I just wanted to flag outcomes. So it used to be in statements there were objectives or targets and things like that. Now the DfE have said everything should be outcomes focused. And what that means is what will be different for a young person and why. And what we have to consider with that is what's important to that young person as well as what's important for that young person. So it's important to that young person that they have friends. It's actually probably important for that young person too. But it's also important for that young person that they're kept safe. So how are our outcomes addressing those? And this is, again, not just something at education healthcare plan level. This is across the board, because what the Code of Practice talks about is that schools should be meeting with families to discuss progress against outcomes for children at SEN support 3 times a year. And all I'm doing this morning is trying to say this is what it is, because I'm aware that that's a massive challenge as well. So one of our key challenges is actually what are we doing at those earliest points of SEN support? What are we doing to identify a young person's needs as soon as possible? Are we using one-page profiles? Are we using IEPs? What is it that we currently use? And I think one of the pieces of work that we need to do centrally and be working with schools and probably learn Sheffield in terms of some feedback around that is saying, what is our model at the earliest stages of intervention? What is it that we're looking at that we need to try and have in place that starts to bring in that graduated approach, that parent involvement, when we're identifying some early needs, some additional supports, the stuff that actually was the school action to school action plus stuff? What is it that we need to have in place that allows us to ensure that we are meeting a young person's needs at those earliest points, rather than letting it escalate? Because one of the conversations that I've had with parents already, and it's been an issue from the past and everywhere, is that actually nothing happens until it gets to crisis point, or parents don't know what's being put in place, or there's not good communication. Now, I would say, I know that that's not the case everywhere. I absolutely know that. But those are the things that are fed back from parents and the main concerns that are raised by organisations like the Parent Carer Forum. And to some extent, that's right. So we've put in place the My Plan in Sheffield as that pre-statutory coordinated plan. But I do think we also need to think pre-My Plan. And that's one of the conversations that I'm trying to have. But the My Plan is not a referral document. It's not a, here's my referral for an EHC plan, please. It's about a coordinated plan to meet a young person's needs within school, with the involvement of appropriate services within mainstream environment. And it works, and it can work. And the reason why I know it can work is because in Wakefield, we had that, and it worked, because it helped us to ensure that planning was done in a more coordinated manner, that things were more joined up, that young people's needs were being met, that parents were more content, they were happy, they understood what was going on. We then have that education healthcare needs assessment. And I know at the moment there are massive challenges around that. But actually, if we've got this early part right, when we get to that point, it should be far, far easier for everybody involved, particularly our schools and parents, because we should already have everything ready, and we're saying, actually, no, we're recognising that we need even more in the next layer. So this is that process. And then reviews. Who's ever been in an annual review where it's been about sitting and reading the statement and what do we change on various lines? I have. Some of them, I want to stick my head through the table when I've sat in ones like that. The reality is, that's not the case everywhere. But our annual review process, not a meeting, but process, should be about saying what's working, what's not working, what do we need to change. All of this is the biggest changes. And all of that is something that we need to provide some better support, training and guidance on for schools. Because I'm not sure that I think we've got really good practice going on in various places, but I'm not sure that we've got it going across the board. And that's one of the things I really want to move towards, ensuring that we're supporting schools better in all of that. Let's give you some facts. Statements to EHC plan. So this is the bit about what's the old to the new. So government gave us up to the end of March 2018 from September 2014 to essentially reassess every child who had a statement of special needs, of which, and that included young people in post-16 providers who had previously an LDA learning difficulties assessment. So that's about 2,500 kids we're supposed to reassess. It's an impossible task, I have to say. It was an absolutely crazy thing from the DFE, but am I allowed to say that on camera? Oh, that's that moment. Said it now. If Elaine, our DFE advisor, is watching this, I'll just say. It was a massive task. Enormous. And we've still got, well, we're down to 3 figures left to do. That's at least something. But we're still heading towards 1,000 young people that we've got to move on to the new system by the end of next March. That's massive. So hopefully, your schools, as Senkos, have received a whole raft of nice new paperwork and guidance from me last week, which they may go, please ask them not to go panic about it. Hopefully it should give much greater clarity as to what's needed to move those young people from the old to the new system. Because part of what we've got to do is make sure that we get from you as schools the information of what you're currently doing and delivering for a child. Because our statements don't necessarily reflect that, because they're smaller documents, they don't detail it in the level that's expected under the SEND reforms. That is a massive challenge. And that's what we're trying to address, whilst bringing in all of the changes, whilst bringing all the difference. And coming into an organisation, having led on that in another organisation, I know how big a challenge that is. In Wakefield, I'd done a huge amount of work with our schools to say, right, let's help you through this. And we need to carry on doing that with our schools in Sheffield. And that's what I want to make sure that we do. Because one of the key criticisms we're getting is that those plans are not specified and quantified. It's a line that will come up in all sorts of places. Now, the reality is, specified and quantified is quite difficult, because I know that 1 week, Jimmy might need 10 minutes a week, one term rather, he might need 10 minutes a week, or 20 minutes a week, specific, spelling intervention. But actually things improve, and then the following term he doesn't need it. But we've written it into an EHC plan, so legally we have to provide it, but he doesn't need it. So we've got to then review the plan and take it out, but parents don't want that taken out, because how does that work? So there are massive challenges over specified and quantified. What the DfE have said is that it should be the minimum specified and quantified, saying actually Jimmy will need a minimum of this intervention, but will also require additional interventions on top at various points to improve things. There's those sorts of things that we're supposed to be looking at. So what it means is when we're coming to write my plans and looking at EHC plans and conversion from statements, we need to be clear about what are we actually delivering already. What are the specific interventions that Jimmy is getting to support his special educational needs? And you as schools will know that, because you will have it timetabled in terms of your support staff, timetabled in terms of the work that your teacher's doing, in terms of making sure that the lesson's differentiated and appropriate to his needs, all of that. Which is why your information is so, so vital to what's written in an EHC plan. As I said, we've sent out new paperwork, and I'm hoping that Senkos find that really helpful and much, much clearer in terms of what needs to be done. Because what it will allow us to do is reach that challenge of trying to get plans done. Because once we've got them done, we can really then work on reviewing them and ensuring that they're as accurate and up to date and supported as possible as a young person moves through adult life. So that's one of the big changes that we've had in terms of moving from the old to the new. Other big changes, local working. As you'll be aware, what we're trying to do is embed the locality model. So we have 7 localities in the city. And part of that is to ensure that we've got good peer support and practice. And part of that is how we're managing our funding, particularly supporting schools in terms of guidance how they might use their notional SEN funding. So you all have a line on your budget that tells you how much you've already got in school, which should meet up to the first £6,000 of support for an individual child. That's the reality, that's the government guidance. And then how that top-up funding that the local authority has to make available from DSG, High Needs Block, that's been given to localities to look at how we can meet the needs of young people with SEN in a more creative way, whilst also meeting the details of what's written in their EHC plan. Massive, massive challenges. One of the pieces of work within that is the Sheffield support grid, in terms of, and I'm sure you've all been variously involved and you'll have all sorts of various views on the Sheffield support grid. My view on the Sheffield support grid, and again, I've got to stop harking back to my old job, but originally it came from Wakefield in terms of a baseline understanding of what a child needs at each level. But it should detail the sorts of provision that a child needs at each level and what sorts of things we should be expecting is in place. So it gives us a starting point always. There's still work to do on the support grid, and I sat in the inclusion task force yesterday, and there's some people doing amazing work there to try and support schools to look at how they're embedding it. Local working, therefore, is supported because the money's there, and because that support's there, it's looking at how are we getting local interventions and support processes in place. And one of the key things within that locality working is moving the request to assess decision panel and decision as to whether we're going to have an EHC needs assessment into a much more local way of working with people clearly looking at those processes around it, involving the parent much more centrally. Because at the minute what happens for a lot of the areas of the city, it comes into a central pot with paperwork, and often we haven't got the information that we necessarily need to make a good decision, and we're making decisions and then we're getting parents frustrated that the decision that's made is not the decision they want. They're going to mediation, they're choosing tribunal routes, and actually if we can try and address that assessment needs earlier through much, much better early intervention, clarity at my plan, all of that sort of stuff, then we can address some of those parental concerns that we have and the challenges that they face. Thought it was quickly useful to just talk about the strategic direction. So hopefully you're aware that we have an inclusion programme board that's chaired by Jane Ludlam, who's Director of Children's Services, Director of People now. Just a big job there for one person to do. And Jane is really committed to ensuring that we are improving our SEND support for children with SEND across the city. The focus of that strategic direction should not and cannot be just education. It has to be much broader than that. Because if we don't ensure that good working together, if we only are focusing on what the educational needs and working in silos, then we are going to continue to not meet and join up a young person's needs. I had a meeting with a parent yesterday, and actually one of my conversations was, well, what's he doing outside of school? Where's he meeting and seeing other peers outside of the education environment? What needs are we addressing? Now, he's got a personal budget for care hours, but actually it's with an adult who spends time with him. No joining up of that bigger picture of stuff necessarily. So it's those sorts of questions and that joining up that's really crucial, both on an individual basis, but also on a citywide basis. Again, a big part of that strategic direction is how we co-produce services, so working with families to say what actually would make the difference for you and your family. How can we look at how that happens? And some of that is we're expected healthcare, education to recommission our provision in a way that works better. Again, our strategic direction has to be outcome focused, so not just outcomes for an individual, but actually what outcomes are we seeing across the city? Are we seeing improvement of children and young people going into employment? It is a scary statistic. How many children in SEND never enter the job market? It is an absolute travesty that is the case. The line everybody likes, Ofsted. Oh my days, Monday morning. So we have a send Ofsted, and every Monday morning there's those twitchy moments because you know by 10 o'clock whether they're coming the following week. So I got an email from my boss at 10 to 9 on Monday this week that just said Ofsted, and I fell through the floor, and then I opened it and he said, I'll be on a train, so if Ofsted call, it's fine. It was not a good moment. And I'll come back to Ofsted in a minute. But crucially in that strategic direction is how are we helping schools understand and deliver their responsibilities. So if you look at the SEND Code of Practice, which hopefully your Senkos, I'm hoping I'm not knocking this off here, your Senkos will have downloaded copies of, printed, annotated, understood, read. There is a whole chapter about school responsibilities there, particular SEN support and what's there. And Senkos would always want me to say, well, at least I'm assuming they would, there is a nice page in there that details what the Senko role is and their responsibilities and how school leaders should be supporting Senkos in those. It is important that we look at that. Ofsted, because it's good to just talk about them. Have I got about 10 minutes? Or a bit less? Right. So Ofsted is an area inspection. It is not an inspection of the local authority, the send Ofsted. It is not an inspection of how well my team is writing AHC plans. It is an inspection of us as a local area. They will come and talk to schools. They will come and look at individual children. They will talk about our health services. They will want us to involve schools, head teachers in focus groups. The way it will work is they will ring us on that Monday morning, give us a fright. We've got a week to arrange everything, and then they come for a whole week. And they will be looking at education, health, care, schools, pre-5, post-16, the whole lot. And they will be focusing on these three key areas: identification and assessment of need, i.e. how do we, from the earliest points, identify the needs of children with SEN and understand those needs and understand what we should do about those needs. They'll focus on the provision to meet those needs. And actually, if you read a lot of the letters that have already been sent, because the outcome of it is that they will send a letter. It's not a judgment. So we're not going to be outstanding, good, requires improvement, or I don't like saying the other one. But what they will do is if they're not happy, they'll expect an action plan. And if they're not happy with that action plan has to be rewritten. If they're not happy again, then that action plan gets escalated to the Secretary of State. So hopefully we won't end up down that route. But if you read the letters that have come out, high percentage of them focus on SEN support and what is happening to meet the needs of children and young people at SEN support, that 12-13%. And that's why it's so important that as schools we're working with you to try and say, how are you doing that work? How are we supporting that work? How are we helping to understand that work? And then they'll be talking about outcomes. What difference is everything making? Because you can throw 1,001 interventions at a young person, but if it's not making a jot of difference to their life, then it's not a good idea. It's not what we should be doing, and we should be doing something different. So again, the school responsibilities around all of that are clearly detailed in the Code of Practice. I don't like talking about Ofsted, but it's unfortunately something that we have to be very mindful of. What's good about it is they're going to inspect every local authority over a 5-year period. I'm desperately hoping we're looking at 2020. That's where I'm going for, but they could well come any week. Placement and provision, one of the biggest challenges, and one of the things that I'm very mindful of is that our special schools are chocker to bursting, not just in terms of their commission numbers, but actually from a health and safety point of view. We can't physically get more kids into a lot of our special schools, and that we need to be very mindful of. I'll come on to the LA Commission Free School, which is going to be the response to some things, but is not going to be the answer to all of our needs. Placement and provision should be about supporting high quality provision in mainstream. And so where we're looking at things like the use of the support grid, where we're looking at things like how the autism service, the EP service are providing advice, where we're looking at what sort of speech and language therapy are doing, where we're looking at that early intervention model, that what are we doing at the My Plan and before that, that's about identifying what will work for this young person and what's the provision. Too often I think we're going for, actually, we need everybody involved now because we've hit crisis point. And that doesn't work for the family, doesn't work for the local authority, doesn't work for the school, and it definitely doesn't work for the young person. Because we need to be addressing how we're putting that high quality provision in place. Interventions that work and address needs, an inclusive SEN support model. So what are we doing for that 12%, 13%? What we are having to do and looking at is reviewing all of our placements to get the numbers right and clearly identify needs. So as I said, because we are chock to bursting, we need to be starting to say, well, what do we need to do differently? How do we need to be clear about what different provision looks like? Having said that, this year for phased transfer, I've got 20 odd young people where the parent wanted specialist provision that we've not given them. That's huge numbers. And we need to be mindful of that as a challenge. And ask the question, why have we got that many that are needing and asking for specialist provision? What could we have done differently that would enable them to be equipped to enter a mainstream secondary environment? The LA Commission Special Free School, so we put in a bid for that, and we got it. Hurrah! That gives us some capital spend. What it doesn't give us is more money in the system to actually educate those young people. But there will be more capacity. It's not there yet. We're hoping it might be as soon as September 2018, but we can't guarantee that.
Can I ask why it's from the age 7 rather than the age of 5?
Because you've got to look at a point and a capacity point. I wasn't part of the initial conversations, but what we need to be mindful of is that we have significant pressure points in the city at various ages, more than at those at that very early primary stage. And actually, if we're getting our SEN support right, we should have, based on the demographics, we've got enough support that's there at that key stage 1. As I said, current capacity issues. What we've got to get to, however, is business as usual, which seems a long way off at the minute, because actually the changes are enormous and are significant. It does feel like we've reached the end of stage 1 and are moving into stage 2. And what I mean by that is we've had a whole bunch of work where we've tried to join up and understand what our current picture is, and we've been in almost a place where everything's just so much going on, so many attempts to try and sort things, and some things have been resolved. So we're at a point where we're trying to say, right, let's put those down a minute and let's look and say, what have we actually got to do? We're almost over halfway through the reform time frame. What have we still got to do and still got to achieve? So we're in the process of saying, what does stage 2 look like that will drive us to business as usual, which is where the reforms are embedded. I would say that the inclusion strategy goes beyond the end of next March. It's not going to suddenly stop and we'll go, yes, we are an inclusive, fully inclusive city, everything's working well, because it will take longer than that. We have a challenge to do. And there is a lot of work still to do to ensure that we've got high quality inclusive practice across everything in our city and that young people's needs are being met. If I was to have the parent carer forum standing up here, they would say we still have issues about communication with parents, about meeting those needs early, about ensuring that we're addressing the concerns that they have across the board. And I know that some of that is within my service and stuff that I'm trying to address, but some of their feedback is how that's across the board. What we have to do is work together. What we can't be is, the LA says, oh, it's like this, and schools go, but we can't do this. What we have to do is work together for the best of all of our children and young people. I want to work with schools to do that. Coming into a local authority is an interesting picture. Coming in where we are at the moment is an even more interesting picture in terms of the challenges that we face as a city. But the only way we can address the challenges that we face as a city is by working together to support everybody and every young person that we have. And making sure that we're taking the good practice, the best bits, the things that are working, and sharing that with other schools, sharing that with other organisations, saying to organisations, well, actually, how can we work in partnership to get this done? What could we do differently? This is what we've done. We were talking at the Inclusion Task Force yesterday about actually how do we do really good, high-quality training for schools? But actually, some of the time, it already exists. It's our best practice practitioners that actually we need to be sharing best practice knowledge with and looking at how that training works. The only way we will achieve this, the only way we will get it right for our children and young people is by doing that together. I'm not sure whether I've necessarily answered what I was originally asked to do because I'm aware that I've given a big picture thing. And actually, we need to be honest about the challenges that we face. We need to be realistic about what we're expected to do. I can't wave a magic wand, unfortunately, and go, ta-da, it's all fixed. I can't create a new pot of cash. I can't do any of those sorts of things. What I can do is commit to saying let's work together and let's work together well, let's work together hard to get from where we are now to this point of business as usual. I think I've got maybe a couple of minutes for any questions if people wanted and had them. And hopefully everybody's not thinking, yes, you've just told me there's more. I know, this is horrible, those sorts of things. But we have to be realistic about where we're at.
It's not that long ago since we moved to working as a locality model, and I wondered if there would be an evaluation and a review of whether that's working, how it's working, what we need to do, what's...
Yeah, I think that's a really sensible thought. I think one of the challenges that we have is how we draw together all of those strategic threads and things like that. Obviously, the Inclusion Task Force have got a role there in terms of how that locality is working out. Part of the challenge is at the moment we're still early days and lots of localities are working in different ways. So, for example, locality D is far ahead in terms of requests to assess than other localities that haven't got to that point yet. And so what we're trying to do is look at individual things as they come along and say what's working, what's not working within that. But I think it would be helpful to have some, actually these are the things that have worked, these are the things that have worked well, these are the things that we need to still address. As part of that action planning going forward. So I think that's a really helpful situation.
Working as a locality model, I think I'm not saying it is or it isn't. I've only got my little view about the little bit that I see. But it was a big jump change.
Yeah.
And is it the most efficient and productive way of working?
I mean, one of the things I would say is that the locality model is what we're looking at across the city, so it's not just the SEND, there's much broader locality focus, so things like early intervention, all those sorts of things, how we look at addressing that. And the problem with being a large area is how do you make things work for a local area with the finite resources that we have as a city. But I think you're right, it's important to make sure we're asking those questions. Any other questions? Well, look at that. Stunned into silence or everyone depressed and sad. Hopefully everyone's happy. Let's go with that one. Thank you for your time. I'm sure I will meet you all at various points as well.
Okay, thanks for coming to appreciate that. Okay. That's not like you to only ask one question. I'm slightly bemused by that. Okay, so...
You're on tape.
Yeah, that's probably what it. It's quite strategic. The tape is quite strategic, actually, on our part. Okay, next up, we're talking about primary achievement strategy. I know Bev's talking, and I think Chris, are you joining Bev for this bit?
I am.
Marvellous. I'll pass over to you then.
Thanks, Stephen. Okay, thank you. Morning, everyone. Would you like to join me, Chris? Unless anybody is going to tell us differently, I want to say that the primary achievement strategy has impacted in a way that we could have never anticipated, actually. When we first met with Diane and with Linda Hoyle, way back, was it September, October last year? We're delighted with the success that there's been. I've got to say, in the words of the old sort of, I think it was a Heineken advert, wasn't it? It's reached the parts of Sheffield that we never expected it could reach, actually, in terms of the coordinated efforts of schools to prepare children for statutory assessment. So we're absolutely delighted with the impact that we've had. I've got to say particular thanks to Chris from Greystones Primary, I'm sure you all know Chris, and to Linda from Winkerbank Nursery Infant, because they have led this strategy as our associate partners to Learn Sheffield. They've worked closely with Diane and myself to ensure a really joined up approach to preparing children, doing the things that we talked about in terms of what we've written there under the focus for 16-17, doing all of those things. We've done it in a very joined up way. I've also got to say thank you to you, many of whom I'm sure have got locality assessment leads working within your schools. We have 37 locality assessment leads across the city now. They're not all statutory moderators. A lot of them are, and I don't want to say just lead practitioners in their field, but they are lead practitioners. They are probably our leaders of the future. People identified by you to be able to work effectively and spread their good practice within their localities. So thank you for releasing those people. Thank you for your commitment. And I know that that's sort of added to the enormous impact that we feel that we've had through this strategy this year. Chris, do you want to talk about this year and what the original intentions were, or do you want me to carry on? Do you want to say something?
Yeah, we started really with looking at the best way of pulling together the best practice that's going on around the authority and trying to get some more joined up thinking. And a lot of heads bought into that straight away. And the group that we've got involves, we've got head teachers, we've got lead moderators, citywide moderators, and we've got just really good practitioners from year 2 and year 6 on that group. And they pulled their knowledge and information, and they've been really open and honest with each other. And it's been a really good forum for that kind of debate and discussion about best practice, actually with the changing landscape and things, new things coming on board all the time from SDA about moderation, what's greater depth, what's the expected standard, and being able to feed that into this bigger group to take back into localities has been really useful. Different localities have engaged in different ways, but one of the big strengths of this for me, we were just saying then about these are probably the school leaders of the future here, and in some localities and in most localities the LALs have been allowed to actually take this on, and they're the ones who are organising moderation meetings, pulling practitioners together, and it's been really useful because just for example, at one of the meetings recently, worryingly, but it was a good thing in the end, there were year 2 teachers there who'd never seen the interim guidance, didn't know it existed. So, we're still addressing some of those issues. Now, they actually put them right. They worked with them on it. The whole group came together. They were looking at the interim guidance, taking people through it, and what the implications were. So it's been a really useful group, and hopefully some of the information that we've sent out, some of the thoughts that they've had on preparing children for SATs in a reasonable way, without going absolutely bonkers about it, at year 2 and at year 6 have been helpful within schools, and the feedback I've had from a lot of colleagues has been that's been really useful, and the year 6 staff have found it useful and the year 2 staff have found it useful, so that's been great. So in that way it has been a very positive experience, and the work we're doing now, we will continue looking at new inputs from STA as they come flying in. But at the moment, it's a really interesting piece of work that we're doing, and the LALs are currently bringing work that may have been moderated already within the localities or the working groups, and we're trying to put together that citywide, agreed, moderated pieces of work. It won't be the Bible, it won't be absolutely this is expected and this is greater depth, but it will be a consensus, because every locality is represented, and it'll be a consensus that's come together from across Sheffield of we think that this is expected because, we think this is greater depth because, and the piece of work that will go with it, with these brilliant practitioners that we've got, is and the next steps for these children, or for the children producing this kind of work, would be to actually move that piece of work on, which I think will be, it's going to take us some time, and it's a piece of work that we'll go through next year, but I think it will be a very worthwhile piece of work. So some of the things we're looking for, or the ideas that we've got at the moment for moving forward, and I sent an email to locality leads, well I didn't, Thomas did on my behalf, yesterday, was whether the work of the locality assessment leads can be part of locality action planning. Doesn't have to be, it's up to localities, but one of the ideas is to give you the dates of the LAL meetings over the next year, and hopefully schools will keep engaging, releasing their staff to come, and that's been an amazing commitment, and hopefully the LALs will want to keep coming, but have those dates so that moderation events, for example, within localities, families or schools, can be timed so they take place just after the locality leads, assessment leads have come together for their meeting, and they can take away what they've got and inform, even better inform, those moderation events that happen across the city. The collection of predictions to better support schools. Now, again, schools engaged brilliantly with that. We sent in the predictions, it was excellent, and a number of localities at steering have used those predictions to help them, not in terms of categorisation, but in terms of targeting where the locality support goes, and the input and development. And that's something we'd like to continue and carry on with next year. I've talked about the moderation activity that we're building on, carrying on, but one of the things that we were thinking about was trying to involve at some stage, especially year 3 teachers, so that year 2 into year 3, and start trying to address some of that dip that we all know about, and it doesn't matter if it's an infant into a junior school or within a primary school, there's still a dip somehow in year 3, and involving year 3 teachers in that process is just an idea we've got at the moment. We haven't got an absolute plan of how we're going to do it, but it is an idea, and I think it's hopefully a worthwhile one that people would agree to. And the involvement of the head teachers was more to do with greater information, joined up thinking, and are you getting enough information from the LALs and what's happening, so you actually know what the LALs are going out with. And that's a question again going out to locality leads to get that feedback of, is there enough information coming to you? Do you want more? Do you want less? Because one of the strengths of this for me is the independence of the LALs. We talk about school-to-school support, system leadership. Well, if they're taking this on and they're driving things and they are so committed to improving outcomes in Sheffield, not just their own schools or localities, but across Sheffield, do we let them get on with it? Or what? And it's how much information as head teachers you would like or you need about what's going on with the LAL group and the achievement strategy all told. Okay.
It is striking that balance, isn't it? It's the same with the Senko issue, actually. You know, we want the Senkos to feel empowered and enthusiastic and get on with it on our behalf as head teachers. But actually, you know, there are certain things that head teachers need to know and need to be aware of. I've got to say, in terms of those locality assessment leads, I think it's about the way in which Chris and Linda have worked with them that has led to that great empowerment. They are feeling very empowered. A lot of these ideas came from those locality assessment leads, and they are just ideas at the moment. And we would appreciate your feedback on that in terms of where we go next.
The next couple of meetings with the LALs will be working around these ideas, and they will be driving the action plan for next year as well. So, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, they're very enthused, they're very engaged, but they are totally reliant upon you releasing them. I could see the looks on faces around the room when Chris said the thing about, you know, someone had not seen, a few people had not seen an interim assessment framework. That's what we're working with. When I said earlier about reaching parts of the city we've not reached before, you know, schools are reliant on that collaborative working. They're reliant upon you releasing your lead practitioners to support them. That's where locality working comes into its own. That's where collaborative working comes into its own, and that's why Learn Sheffield's about what it's actually about. So we would like to think that you share the enthusiasm of your locality assessment leads for this strategy, but actually you have a way of feeding back to us, because I'm going to talk shortly actually about the Learn Sheffield questionnaire that's coming out to you, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So you have a way of feeding back to us about this, and we really do need to know what you think, because there are so many calls on your time and on the time of your outstanding practitioners and leaders. And obviously, as head teachers, you've got to make that choice about who you can release when and what's worthwhile. And if it's not worthwhile, then it's not worth doing anyway. I suppose the proof of the pudding will be in what happens with the results this year. You know, because it's all right us standing here and talking about this in a very subjective way. We need those outcomes, just as Tim was speaking earlier about SEND outcomes. We need those outcomes in terms of you know, the achievement of pupils at Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. Is there anything else, Chris, that we need to be saying? We will be meeting with the primary improvement partners at the Primary Improvement Board meeting next Tuesday. And we will be releasing some I don't think they're suggested dates, I think they're actual dates for monthly meetings next year. And we will be working with your primary improvement partners who come to those board meetings to look at how those dates might fit in with your windows for full locality heads meetings and steering group meetings, etc. And we're hoping to try and put all of those together and firm those up really before the end of June if we can, so you can plan your calendars in school around that. We're trying to get ahead of the game this year. Wow. It's all right saying it, we just need to achieve it, don't we? But we have got those dates already, and they will be released to you as soon as they've been agreed. Yeah. They've been agreed, hopefully next week at the Primary Improvement Board meeting. Does anyone have any questions about this? Brilliant.
Excellent.
Thank you, Chris, for joining in with that one. Okay, Stephen, okay, we're good? We'll give back to you then.
Okay, so do you want to start off?
I will start off with this actually, because there are quite a number of people in the room who were present at the last primary leaders briefing when I talked about wanting to gain your views about the performance of Learn Sheffield in order to inform action planning as we move forward. Quite a few ideas. It was interesting what Sue said about being on camera earlier, because quite a few ideas were shared within the meeting, but many more ideas were shared outside of the meeting. And that really was helpful in that it supported our thinking. I did talk to you at the last meeting about our team planning day, which we were holding in the first week of this half term, and it certainly informed our team's thinking about how we approach further evaluation really and review. So I have to say to you that the questionnaire, which has been reviewed and refined on a number of occasions, is going to be coming out to you this week. A lot of the questions, and I'm looking at certain people in the room who raised questions with me or told me that they wanted to know more about certain things, you will find them, I'm sure, within the questionnaire which will come out to you. So you will have a chance to comment. The questionnaire that is coming out through your primary improvement partner, that's the person who represents you on the primary improvement board, and this is a primary questionnaire. We're talking a moment about how we're sort of consulting with other sectors and phases. This questionnaire will come out through your primary improvement partner. Thomas knows a lot more about what kind of document it is. Thomas, it's a
Google form, yes.
It's in Google form. How long will it take us to complete? About 5 minutes? 5 minutes at the most.
Well, depending how many
5 to 10 if you've got lots of comments to make.
That's fine too.
Do you know what? I'd love to think, Stephen, that all the schools that signed up to be part of Learn Sheffield, and that's all of you, and everyone in the city, I'd love to think that every school could feed back to us, very honestly, in terms of the questions that are there. Most of them, well, I think they're all just tick boxes, actually, or ticking the ones that apply, with boxes here and there for comments. Please encourage everyone to complete that questionnaire. If you don't, really, you're missing your opportunity to inform action planning as we move forward. As I said last time, this is your school's company, and you need to own it by supporting the small team that we've got at Learn Sheffield in devising our action plans as we move forward. Do you want to say about the event on the 23rd,
Yeah, so
Stephen?
we've ummed and ahed about this in different ways, and in the end we've decided to do it in sectors. So we're going to have a session with secondary heads, we're going to have a session with special heads, and then we're going to have a primary event. It is open to any school leaders in primary who want to come, so it's open in that way. But we are specifically asking each locality to send at least 3 or 4, depending on the size of the locality. The reason we're asking for that is that within this morning that we're working together, there will be some sessions where we're working on strategies and working on things. And obviously, whenever you do that and you don't have a genuine representation across the city and you don't have at least sort of 20 or so people there, then that's got some limitations to it, hasn't it, in terms of whether you're understanding everybody's needs. So we are looking for every locality to get at least 3 or 4 people to this event, but it is open, and actually there'll be an Eventbrite and you can just sign up, and if there's 100 people here, then there's 100 people here, and we'll find a bigger room. Okay. The content of it, there's 6 areas there. Some of those are quite broad. One is looking at the questionnaire, the outcome of the questionnaire, so there'll be an element of this is what you've told us, this is how we interpret it, this is what we think we should do about it, there'll be some of that. We'll be looking at the Sheffield priorities, but very specifically in terms of, from those priorities, what are the big strategies happening in 17-18. Some of that's about saying, is that right? Is this what you need it to be? Some of it is about saying, right, so there's this big piece of work on research schools, there's this big piece of work on healthy minds, whatever it might be, and you need to know more about it. So some of it's that kind of stuff. School improvement strategy and categorisation process, that's being reviewed at the moment by the Primary Improvement Board, hopefully next week, and finalised before then. So what we want to be able to do in June is come to you and say, this is how it's different next year. We're not proposing it being wildly different, it's not a start from scratch thing, but there's a conversation, for example, happening about whether we introduce both into the criteria and also into the entitlement a broader range of things. So, for example, do we include some stuff around inclusion and SEND? Do we look at some wider things around perhaps attendance, those kind of things? If we put any of that into the criteria, though, we equally need to put stuff into the entitlement. So it's not just about saying, well, this is an issue and good luck. It's more about saying this is an issue and this is therefore what we can offer as a city to support, if that makes sense. So that's the conversation that we're having there. Learn Sheffield team roles will be a kind of update on us really, so there will be some little bit of growth in our team for next year. We want to be able to confirm to you on the Friday the 23rd of June, for example, who your locality contact will be for next year and things like that. We don't want that stuff to be September. We want that stuff to be sorted out by June if we possibly can do that. Learn Sheffield model a relationship with the LA. I think that links into the last one, which is about the long-term planning really. We are at a point where, and by then we will have had an election, and hopefully by then we'll have a sense of not just who won the election, but what implications that has for the Department for Education, which is probably the bit that makes the biggest difference to us. We are at a point where things are starting to become clearer about the way school improvement, for example, will be funded nationally in the future, and it is very different. Obviously it's clearly a move away from local authorities. So what we're looking at and working on are the models for how we continue to do that as a city. That won't all be nailed down by the 23rd of June, but it's clearly a good point in time for us to say, right, this is the reality of what we've got, this is how we think we might achieve it, and these are the kind of conversations that we're having, and at least start to join a wider group of people into those discussions. As I said before, event open to everyone. We're looking for at least 3 or 4 from every locality, and it's the morning of Friday the 23rd of June. Okay.
Can I just remind everyone actually that the deadline for completion of that question?
Do you like my red circle?
Yeah, and I still forgot it. The deadline is June the 9th, Friday, June the 9th, and that's so that we can collate all the information in time to feed back to you on the 23rd. So if you could complete by then and get that message out there, we're wanting as many returns as possible, please.
That'll land in our inboxes with it.
You're going to get a letter, and then in the email with the letter there'll be a link.
Yes.
Okay, couple of general updates. Yeah, can do. Couple of general updates. I wanted really to just remind people about the website and the Twitter, because they are by a distance the best way of keeping on top of the things that are happening. And obviously, we have a lot of discussions internally about how often we email you, if I'm being really brutally honest. We could probably email you 3 or 4 times a day with different little bits and pieces that are happening. We try not to do that because we have those inboxes. We've had those inboxes in the past. You just stop looking, don't you, after a while if the flow's too much. So if we think about the communication as a two-way thing, then obviously your half of that is, keep engaged with the website, keep engaged with the Twitter. If you do Twitter, pretty much everything that you really need to know will come through our Twitter feed and link back into our website. So that's the easiest way, but I'm aware that that's not everyone's bag. Other things to point out, Opportunities Bulletin is currently coming out about once a month. There was one at the start of May, there'll be another one at the start of June. There's a lot of stuff in those bulletins. I think the last one was about 8 or 9 pages long. I think the next one will probably be similar. It's already kind of filling up, and we're way off it yet. We've tried in those bulletins, I'm sure you'll have seen, to tag primary, secondary and special, so that as you kind of skim through, you've got a way of just having a quick glance. And we're also trying to use the Opportunities Bulletin to also flag up other stuff. So, for example, commissions. We tend to flag up commissions and stuff like that that's available in those bulletins, and hopefully they're useful. Subject networks, I'm saying specifically so that just in case you've not seen it or in case you've not been aware of them this year. So we funded subject networks this year, which is the 20, 30, whatever it is, networks that run across primary and secondary for different subjects. They're free to you. We've been able to make a commitment to fund them again next year, so they're going to continue through next year and continue to be free. It's on the website. On the website there, actually that's the wrong arm for me to lift up. If you're on the website there, in terms of the dates have been released for the next lot, which are coming up in June, and we're trying to get the dates set for next year to go out to you this June, so you've got a sense of when they'll be. They tend to be in a 2-week window each term, and they've been done in that way so that if you want to take the view that you're going to just send all of your staff to a network, you could, for example, lose a staff meeting to accommodate that time. We think the networks will expand. They have been incredibly popular, and that's I think been very positive. But I suspect that when we come to analyse the numbers and look at that, I suspect that we'll find that there are quite a lot of schools who engage in a huge way, a small number of schools we engage a bit and send people, one or two people to one or two things, and then a group of schools that haven't kind of got to that this year. Now, if that's because they know about it, they've looked at it doesn't meet their needs, that's fine, isn't it? But if it's because they've not kind of got their head around it or not been aware of it, then that's a shame, because it's a good opportunity. And they're developing well as networks. I think it's important that they continue, and I think that's why we've decided to fund them again next year. It gives the system as a whole a place to go and give information to a group of coordinators in a way that had been lost a little bit. But more than anything else, it's the thing that Bev and Chris talked about in terms of the primary achievement group. They are owned by the people in them. So the content of the networks is coming from what people are asking for. And because they're funded, because there's somebody funded to run that network, then they have a little bit of time to go away and plan and organise, which means that if the group come and say, well, actually, we're all worried about X, they can go away and find the information, find the person to come and talk about it, and then do that at the next meeting. And I think that's a good way to work. Commissions, yeah.
Thank you so much for doing that. That has been brilliant. The staff who've engaged in that have found that really, really valuable, and the meetings are really, really valuable, and we need to let other people know who haven't somehow engaged in it. I mean, that's our job. But thank you. Oh, thank you. That's
appreciated. In terms of the commissions, we've got, I think, 2 or 3 out at the moment. There's an EEF trial called Unlock, which is around, I think it's Y2s and Y5s. Worth having a look at that. It's around a particular type of questioning in maths and science. There's a gender equality charter mark out, which I think is a secondary one. And actually, the Move More one has finished, actually, and the outcomes of that are coming out today. We are going to put a commission out, which is in the next few days, around the Heritage Open Days stuff that happens early in September. I don't know if you're familiar with it just as a person living in Sheffield, but for the last few years it's grown and grown. And I think last year there were 80-something different opportunities. There's a weekend, I think it's like Friday and a Saturday, early in September, when across Sheffield loads of different buildings, different places just open their doors for set periods, and it's an opportunity for people around the city for free to just go and look at stuff and look at places and see buildings and find out about things, and all kinds of different heritage groups do activities around it. But the key element of it is you get to go and look. I'm going to put a commission out just to see if any schools would be interested in opening on that Friday. I don't imagine there'll not be a massive amount of call for the Saturday. But if any schools would be interested in opening, because it just occurs to me that we have some really interesting buildings around the city. And actually, whenever we, as a head, whenever I've kind of done that open door thing and said, right, for these 2 hours you can come and some children will give you a tour and you can look at the building, it tends to attract a random sample of people, some of which are not actually parents and carers and so on. They're actually people who attended the school 50 years ago or whatever. So we're going to put a commission out to keep an eye out for that. I'm not sure it'll be a huge thing, but it's a nice idea. Keep an eye on the commissions anyway. Governance training, for those of you who subscribe to governance training, or those of you who would like to, and you should because it's fab, he says, in salesman mode. That will be out next week. The offer for next year, we can hold the price. We're going to hold the price up to the summer, and then it goes up a little bit if you choose to sign up, but not till September. Okay. And I just want to draw your attention to one other thing. I'll use my red pointer. If you go in the partnership section of the website, we've introduced various partnership pages, and it's come through working with different groups of people. There's one around equalities. There's one around well-being, there's one around inclusion. SACRE have a page there, or a set of pages there, which have got a lot of content around RE, and it's also where the Cultural Education Partnership is that I'll talk about. We'll try and feed that, we'll keep feeding that sort of stuff through the news and through the Twitter, but it is worth a look. So if you've got concerns or issues or stuff that comes up in those areas, we're hoping that that's where we can put some content from different people that will help. So, for example, in the Equalities section, there's some basic school information about the Equalities Act, and that will build up with more resources as time goes on, and so on. Okay, Cultural Education Partnership, I just want to do a bit of a pitch for, really. Some of you will know loads about this, some of you will know not very much. Thank you. There's a pile of them here. If you've not, you should all have one of these by your localities. Grab one afterwards if not. The purpose of this booklet is really to describe the work that's going on in the first 6 months to get this thing up and set up and running. We've gone at this with some gusto because we think it's important, and we've actually got 7 task and finish groups working on those areas that are listed in there. So the governance group obviously thinking about how it will be structured and how it will work. The finance group coming up with a model for how it will be sustained. There's a communications group developing obviously all the comms stuff around it. There's a group looking at training, and there will be a training offer from the SEP next year. A group looking at resources, which is about the development of resources to support people, both in the curriculum but also outside the curriculum. There's a research group, the Research Collective, and then there's a group looking at the Beyond July bit. Now, up to this point, we've not made a big ask of schools because we're conscious that, to some degree, I mean, my view was you didn't particularly need to dive into this because actually there's a lot of work to do before it becomes something that can do the things you need it to do. We will be at that point at the end of the year, okay? So we're having a conference in September, which is almost like a launch event, really, for it. It's going to be based around Tudor Square, so it'll be probably using the Crucible, using the Lyceum, using some of the buildings around Tudor Square. Friday the 22nd of September, we would really like every school to be represented at that conference. It should be a very inspiring day, actually, but it also will be a day to get a clear understanding of what the SEP is going to offer you, what you can get from the SEP, and also what's the ask that it's making of you. I keep using SEP, the Sheffield Cultural Education Partnership, because that's the Arts Council thing. They want local cultural education partnerships. It may, by September, have a different name, which is a bit less rubbish, okay? And that we might move on from there. But that's what it's called at the moment. There's a pile of the booklets down at the front. Here, if you've not had one, but we have also sent them out through localities. It just takes you through what's happening. It's not a big read. It's not particularly loads of information, but it just kind of, for example, summarises for you what each of those different task and finish groups are trying to accomplish. But be aware of it, and if you can, save that date in September. Whether it's you or whether it's somebody else in your school who you think's the right person to be coming and getting involved in that, but we would love to have as many people as possible there. Particularly if we're going to have the Crucible Theatre, which is quite a big venue if you end up with 70 people, isn't it? Okay. Next thing, Leadership Development Programme we want to talk about. This is one of those things where we're trying to organise the world a bit and make it simpler and easier to follow and interact with. This will be out, we hope, around about the time of the June event. So I'm hoping, ideally, when people who come on the 23rd, we'll be able to give it to them. It'll be a booklet, effectively, and we'll be able to send it out, put it online around that time. That's the intention. It's going to cover various things. It's going to cover what we're doing about primary leaders and leaders briefings and priority workshops, which we're going to talk about specifically in a minute. We're going to try and have as much of the 17-18 calendar information in there as we can, so we kind of know where we are going forward, and it will include the information about the subject networks, which will fold underneath this next year. We're also, though, finding that in a number of different areas where we work with other people, there's effectively a training offer of some kind that's developing. So the achievement strategy and the moderation training obviously will be a good example of that. We're about we've agreed with Huntington the research school in York, John Tomset's school, for those of you who are familiar with John Tomset, that we're going to do a 3-year research project with them, which will effectively give us training for research leads and teaching and learning leads in schools in Sheffield. 3-year model. First year they'll deliver and Sheffield colleagues will receive. Second year, Sheffield colleagues will join in with the delivery, and then in the third year it's pretty much us delivering with their support. The idea being that at the end of the 3 years we've got a cohort of people who are trained as research leads and a cohort of people who are trained as teaching and learning leads, but we also have a cohort of people who are trained to carry on that process as we go forward, so we don't stay dependent on other people. We develop the capacity within the city. There is obviously already capacity within the city for that, and we're hoping that will engage that from the beginning. The ECM programme, some of you will have been to ECM training that we've done this year. Next year there's a bigger programme which is just going to go out to everybody, and Learn Sheffield will buy some places on that programme and use it as part of the categorisation entitlement as we've done this year. So they'll put that out. The governance training we've talked about, but there's the free stuff within that, so whether you subscribe or not, there's stuff in there that's free to all schools in terms of briefings. Inclusion Task Force was mentioned a couple of times this morning by Tim, and I know his colleagues in the room from the Inclusion Task Force. I think it's fair to say that we don't know exactly what that will look like yet. Is that a fair comment? But I think there will be a training offer from the Inclusion Task Force saying, here is the training that we think supports you in delivering this change around SEND and around inclusion. And there needs to be somewhere to put that. Healthy Minds, a lot of you will be aware of, because I think 80 schools bid for the next round of the Healthy Minds rollout. We have agreed with CAMS and with the local authority that Learn Sheffield will provide the business support for that process. So essentially that means that all of the comms will run through us, and we'll administer the process of recruiting the 40 schools for 2018-19 and so on. What we hope that means is that it makes it simple, because you know where to go to ask questions, and we can then direct people to the right places and support with that. I anticipate there being, in addition to the rollout, which is obviously about the CAMS in-school support for specific schools that are doing the programme, I anticipate that there will also be some whole city training and some whole city resources and opportunities, and we obviously need somewhere to put those. We're talking to ESCAL about some specific Learn Sheffield priorities, particularly around reading, and there'll be I think there'll be an offer in that area, and as I said before, there'll also be some SEP offer some training around the cultural education stuff. Some of that's for schools, some of that's for heritage and cultural organisations, some of that's for individual providers, artists and so on, and obviously we'll put that in there. Those programmes, quite a lot of those programmes, some of them are just commercial programmes and you sign up or you don't, but quite a lot of the content in there will also be free stuff. So it'll be a mixture of, and you just need to be clear about that. But we thought it was useful to gather it into one place. That means you've got a way of looking through that and understanding what's on offer. Last bit around it is the conference stuff. We are finding ourselves getting involved in, so I think that's probably the more accurate way of saying it, rather than we've actively gone out and done this, in a number of conference type events. Sometimes conference is a bit grand for what some of those things are. Some of those things in my mind are really a workshop that's a bit longer rather than a conference, but you get the idea. The SEP, obviously, we've talked about. There will be a Healthy Minds conference for the city at some stage next year. So there's initial stuff for the schools that are involved in the next stage of the pilot in June, we hope. That's dates just about, hopefully about ready to be confirmed. But there will be a city-wide Healthy Minds conference, which I think is really important at some stage in the year, so that people who have already been involved can see how it's rolling forward, but also schools that have not yet been involved. And obviously, we're still only going to be at 55 or something, aren't we, by the end of next year? So it's a process to come and see what's going on and why it's going on. And I think what that will also enable us to do, because the schools who are in the next batch will already know by the end of this school year, or certainly early next school year, whether they're in that group, then actually you've got a chance to engage in that and get a sense of what it's about and make sure you hit the ground running. There'll be a research conference linked to the research project that we're doing with Huntingdon. We are doing, I can't think of a better title for it, but a conference about poverty and the impact of poverty on education and things that schools can do to support in that area. We've got an amazing guy coming from the Children's Foundation to talk at that conference, and that should be interesting. Governance conference, and obviously there'll be a leadership conference as well later on in the year. So that will hopefully come out to you as a booklet, as a package, and obviously on the website around the 23rd of June. Pass over to you, Beth, for this bit.
I'll start. Do you want to pick
Yeah, I should think about it.
Yeah, okay. Steve and I are regularly invited to attend primary leaders partnership meetings, chaired by Paul, and have been chaired by Paul for some considerable number of years now, even though he's tried to pass that responsibility several times on to other people.
3 or 4
I've got it, and maybe I should say first, this was not, what I'm going to tell you now was not an attempt by Paul to pass some responsibility on. So I attended on behalf of Learn Sheffield the last primary leaders partnership meeting which was held at Mansell, if I remember correctly. And I was a party to discussions about the remit of the PLP about the work that goes on at PLP and how more recently there's been some duplication in terms of what happens at these primary leaders briefings and what happens at PLP. And that forced a really interesting discussion about the future of primary leaders briefings, we're sitting in one now, and future of the PLP. There were some really interesting thoughts around possible directions of travel. I won't go into those now because no doubt those have been communicated to you through your reps on the PLP. Following on, it was agreed at the meeting that Paul would meet with myself and Stephen to look at how we could sort of move this forward. And there is a primary leaders partnership meeting. Tomorrow. It is tomorrow. Is it a Mansell?
Tomorrow, Mansell.
Thank you.
Yes, it is.
Okay. And there will be, thank you Stuart, there will be some proposals following our discussions at the primary leaders partnership meeting tomorrow. One of the things that we were most concerned about as Learn Sheffield and as members of the primary leadership partnership group, as I say, was the duplication, and it was highlighted by the fact that I think we'd had Ian Reid talk at the primary leaders briefing on the Wednesday before that meeting, and then he'd gone along with Janine and sort of done the same talk at the primary leaders partnership meeting the following day.
And our response to that is to do exactly that again and talk to you today and
talk to you tomorrow. Well, no, because actually the decisions need to be made tomorrow. They can't be made here. We've got to make some decisions, Peter, at the meeting tomorrow about how we move forward, because we can't go on like this. It is actually a waste of your time. It was a waste of Ian's time to be doing the same thing twice.
Tim's doing the same. Tim's going tomorrow.
Exactly.
But it was brought up in our locality that they felt there needed to be some form that was beyond just information sharing, where people could feel that they could bring their views back.
And that,
if it went completely, that would.
That is exactly what we discussed with Paul when he came to meet with us last week.
I think when we took to Paul,
exactly that.
What we found interesting was all three of the. So we've done obviously leaders briefings. We've done some workshops this year around specific themes, and there's obviously the PLP is there. You don't really talk to anybody who says that they want any of those things to disappear, as in whether they come or engage or they don't. They want those things to be there. So what we've tried to do is come up with a suggestion of a way to keep all three elements, but actually make it a bit more joined up.
You see, we feel very strongly at Learn Sheffield that there's got to be an opportunity for you to talk about Learn Sheffield without Learn Sheffield being present. And that for me and for Stephen and for everyone else at Learn Sheffield is absolutely essential. That's how we get to improve our performance and practice here. So some proposals, I'm trying to sort of generate some interest for the meeting tomorrow. Should be Paul standing here. Some proposals will come to the meeting tomorrow. And we're very keen, when I say we, the three of us are very keen. Well, I think that needs elaborating on, doesn't it? We're very keen that we get a decision made about how we move this forward and that things change from September, because, as I said earlier about your locality assessment leads, you know, an effective use of their time, it's about effective use of your time as well. So please, if you weren't thinking about joining in those discussions tomorrow, if you could think again, or at least make sure that your locality is represented at that meeting, because last time, unfortunately, not all localities, I think there were 2 or 3 missing, weren't there, Kathy? At the Primary Leaders Partnership meeting. So please, if you could sort of ring around today and get someone to represent you, at the very least, that'd be helpful. Stephen, do you want to say anything?
Do we want to just have 2 minutes now?
Do you want to do that?
Do you want to just take a couple of minutes and have a chat on your tables? But if you have got, obviously this is ever so sketchy, and I should have put this in bright red and bold, the start of the 10 bit at the bottom. But what we're gently proposing is that we might have one event in each half term, and it might have those 3 parts. So there might be a heads only bit, a leaders only bit, then a shorter briefing, which is just information sharing, and potentially that at the start of the briefing there's an opportunity for things that have come out of the briefing to then be asked and talked about and raised, and that we'd then have a themed third part, which would be more somebody comes and gives an input and there's an actual opportunity to input and discuss. Now, that obviously in reality, when you then come to run that 6 times in the year, the length and size and scope of those 3 things can go up and can go down, can't they, as they need to. But the principle of there being 3 components and it happening on the same morning each time, we're still trying to stick to. We can't have people going out 6 times a year for the whole morning, because I think those people, colleagues who were in the room who were part of PLP when it used to be the entire morning, that is quite a big ask of time. So we're trying to keep it sensible in terms of that. But I suppose we'd be interested in 2 things. One, what your thoughts are about the idea of bringing it into one session and having 3 parts. And then secondly, whether you think those sort of broad time allocations and stuff would be about right.
That would happen instead of one of the head teacher briefings and one of the PLPs.
That would happen 6 times in the year,
Instead
once every half term.
Instead of both.
Instead of PLP and instead of briefings. Yeah. And we would try not to do too many workshops at other times. We'd try and feed it so that it was 6 times a year when you come, 2.5 hours, and all of those things happen.
If I can just add, sorry Kathy, if I can just add one more thing before you come in. Paul was very much of the opinion actually that primary leaders should be dictating what those themed workshops were all about, and that they should be planned in over the course of the year.
Yeah.
And I know that you mentioned schools forum and people getting to understand all the workings of that a bit better, but it would be your choice as to what they were and they would be planned in. So you could plan well in advance your representation or your attendance at those meetings. That was the idea. Sorry, Kathy.
As somebody who's been on PLP many years, sort of I can see why it definitely perhaps needs to change in its format. But one of the difficulties of just looking at that format, it looks quite tame in terms of, so for instance, we've had Tim here today, and with the camera pointing there are questions that I may or may not have wanted to ask, that tomorrow morning, being at PLP, I will. When I look at the new forum, I see we're all leaders and we'll probably speak quite robustly within that, but then it sounds very lame, no offence, later on. It doesn't sound like, at what point can we hold certain people to account in that sense, which PLP role has always been, and that doesn't...
2 things there. I think one would be we have to decide if we want to film any of it or if we want to film some of it, and I think you're right, and it might just be that you only film, and clearly we're not going to film the heads only bit, but that would be live streaming there, would be interesting. We would, at the most, I think we might film the briefing bit so it can be shared with colleagues, but we don't have to do that, and I think we're mindful of, although that feels like a good idea, and people, probably 50 or 60 people tend to look at it at some stage, it has its limitations as well. The second thing is, for something like that, I think the decision we have to make is where does it go? And actually, if it needs to be a proper examination of it, well, then it goes in the workshop for me.
Yeah.
Because that's where you get a chance to talk and work and ask questions and work through stuff.
But it needs to be that there's at times robust discussion takes place.
I agree. And the camera does limit robust discussion.
It does.
That's a very odd thing to say on camera, but...
Maybe that could be reordered.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that then in terms of a couple of things really. What's the actual remit of PLP? Because we sit there and we talk about things, and actually certainly the feeling from our locality was, is that where we have our opinions heard and then a decision is made, fed back, however that works. And if that's the case, we were just saying a reordering, so that actually leaders briefing, and then anything that arises after chewing it over can then actually be decided.
That's a good suggestion.
Because we come out of there hearing lots of things.
I think on the first one,
Don't know what the remit
there's
is.
a couple of things there, isn't there? One is, at the moment, PLP can't be a decision-making body because it's not got enough representation on it. So that's the first thing. So if we need to have a decision-making body, then we need to do something with PLP that makes it able to do that. So, for example, when Ian talked initially about the proposal around reintegration of excluded pupils, you know, in the secondary sector, that goes to secondary heads, it's presented, it's discussed and it's voted on. We don't, just because of the sheer number of schools, you can't do that very easily in primary. So if PLP is going to play that role, then it's got to have representation on it. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, I think from the Sheffield point of view, we're very, very reluctant to express any kind of view about what PLP's remit should be, because it's not ours, and it actively shouldn't be ours. And I think from both of our perspectives, that's often been a bit muddy because we were both on PLP as school leaders and then started to do this, and so I think people have often been very comfortable with us being in the heads bits, but actually that's not necessarily right, if that makes sense.
Chris?
I think what Lynette said then about briefing first, followed by a PLP. Now, you're absolutely right, so that needs sorting. It's not necessarily a Learn Sheffield thing to sort, so perhaps whoever's going to PLP tomorrow, something to take back is a suggestion to locality that PLP becomes a decision-making body, because it is representative of locality and it should have people from every locality present.
It used to be.
So it used to be, and so localities have got to get their act together, because just like you said then, secondary head is easy, come together, make a decision.
Well, it's never easy, Chris, but
Yeah, you know what I mean?
logistically, you're right.
Logistically primary isn't, which is why the PLP, or whatever it used to be called, was set up to start with. And we need to get that sorted out, but a natural way of doing it would seem to me to have the briefing first, so there's not repetition for people like Tim, Ian, anyone talking here, then talking there. And actually there aren't decisions made here by us or there, and it depends how localities go, but it's all a bit woolly at the moment, so perhaps locality from PLP tomorrow, the message goes back to localities, we need to make a decision on this. Is it going to be a representative decision-making body? And if it is, right, let's get representation there from every locality. It can meet after any briefings, the dates would be set, and then the information's been shared.
Yeah.
And it isn't very often that it needs to be decision making. I mean,
No.
it's once or twice a year, isn't
Yeah.
it? Because we don't do a lot of stuff in that way anymore.
No.
But and there's generally plenty of scope to say there's going to be a decision made here, discuss it in your locality, take it to that meeting.
Yeah.
As a new head teacher, I'm not actually, it's been very interesting because I didn't even know what PLP was, but can anybody go to PLP, or are you chosen to go to PLP?
Each locality has a representation at it, in theory.
So like the meeting tomorrow, there will be somebody from my locality
You get
going?
someone from SWIP actually.
Okay, and I know who that person is.
Without saying them in camera.
So different localities have their own different arrangements.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Kathy?
If we're moving forward in new ways of working, it's still unclear in my head how things like school forum sort of feed and discussions that need to take place within that, the inclusion strategy. And if I was trying to explain to a new head or I've got a new deputy secretary about how that all works, actually it's very, very muddy and very confusing about the different rails, and I think there needs to be a much clearer pattern.
It's very interesting. Sorry, Steve. It's very interesting you should raise that, because Learn Sheffield has been approached about producing an induction pack for new head teachers, and we started to have that sort of discussion as well. We know that it's lacking, and it is very important. And this is part of the reason that we're trying to do the very practical thing of getting all the dates in the right order and slot. We're trying to slot
who is
other
on
things.
which and what's their remit and their focus, and is it volunteering, is it voted, or and it's very confused.
Yeah, it is.
Can I just ask, are there people in the room? Sorry, Steve. Are there people in the room who are going to PLP tomorrow? Yeah. Okay, that's good.
I was going to say, and that confusion doesn't get easier because we have an increasingly fragmented system as well among schools. So it's harder and harder to see what the obvious routes into things are, I think. But that's this isn't
Does that mean that that's only for people who are voted as our representatives, i.e. the present PLP type
well,
people?
and I think that's something that will come up tomorrow.
This is just dawning on me that I might not get the chance to opt into things
Yeah.
anymore if I'm not on PLP.
I think
Well, the briefing and the workshop clearly can't be only for representatives, can they? They've got to be open. I think that's something they'll get discussed tomorrow as to whether PLP wants to keep a representative structure, or it wants to be more open, or whether it wants to be open but have a voting mechanism that's separate, that's within it. Does that make sense?
Oh, but the news is tomorrow, Stuart.
Good introduction.
My only concern is that you won't have the reps from each locality.
Well, that's their fault. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
we'll have 6 from F.
As is usually the case.
Oh, sorry.
That's great.
You've just
That's
given away
how
the
it
whole left secret. All right, any other questions for
It's not for want of trying to, actually.
That was a bit facetious. I just wondered,
No.
because it is such an important meeting, and I don't know whose role it will be, to make sure that all PLP reps do
Well,
know.
Okay.
I think our little bit of protection there is that whatever we've decided will then go into that event in June where everybody will be represented. So there is a point in time, isn't there, where if people felt it was wrong, they've got a chance to come back and say that, I think.
What I can also say, Sue, is that I do check at every briefing that we've got. Sorry, Jenny. What I do check at every primary leaders briefing is that we've got a rep from every locality in this room, and we always do have. So I know that from every locality there's someone here. So if you can check around the room, and if you're the only person from your locality, just make a note that you may or may not want to do something about the discussion we've just had when you get back to school. I think that's the best way forward. Yeah.
All right. Should we move on to the last item?
Last item. I'm tempted to bring Stuart up to the front, actually. Oh, where do we go?
There you go.
Okay, Stuart, would you like to join me?
I've got that very page.
You probably have. You might not have got any further.
No.
But you've got that very page, yes. Welcome to the Analysed School Performance System.
They didn't think those letters through, did they?
I think, is that something about aspiration? I don't know what it is all about, but there you go.
Bit too near.
I did say to Stuart earlier, please don't worry, you know just about as much as we do, and if you know a little bit more, you're probably as, should I say on camera, as underwhelmed as Diane and Peter were when they went to have a look at it in a bit more detail. Was that last week, Diane?
Yeah.
Okay, we don't know too much about it apart from the fact that we've managed to get into it, which is probably more than you've done, actually. Okay, are you having trouble?
No, I know how to get into it now, but
Okay.
it's tricky.
Okay, yes, it is very tricky. And I was hearing that from Stuart and his experiences this morning. Through the secure portal, we know that you are having difficulty. As I say, we got into it, or Diane and Pete got into it on behalf of the Learn Sheffield team. We're very underwhelmed by it and can't wait to see what more features will be added. So, in terms of training, well, you know it's there. In terms of training, we're thinking at the moment that the best that we can offer for you with the limited amount of information that we have are some initial familiarisation sessions, and the dates of those, they haven't been circulated because we only agreed them widely. We only agreed them just before we came into the meeting. But Kate Wilkinson's team, the past team, are going to be joining us, and as many of the Learn Sheffield team are going to be joining us to support you. If you can bring your laptops along with you to Learn Sheffield, to any one of these workshops, then we will support you in getting into it and taking you through it as far as we are able to. Is that fair, Diane, to say that? We will probably only be able to accommodate about 15 people at a time. So
15 schools at a time.
Well, we're asking for one person from each school.
Slightly changed now. Yeah, it developed in last
it
hour.
developed whilst I was sleeping, I think,
it did.
last night.
That was your mistake.
Okay, yeah, often is. Okay, so we're going for 2 people, but we still have to we will have to make a decision about how many people we can accommodate at each session, dependent upon how many of our staff we can release to support you. There's no point you coming along and just ending up going away as frustrated as some of you are clearly feeling now about not being able to get into
And
it.
we're also obviously conscious that around cities there's some of this happening already, and that's fine. But we felt it was important that there was at least one central thing that you would enable to get familiarised before the summer. Can I just add one thing to that?
Yes.
I think we also need to be clear that this is where we're going, but it's not where we are right now. So, I think it's important to be familiar with it. I think it's important to be aware of it. This is not the be-all and end-all this June and July. If your school was inspected the RAISEonline is the document that's there. It's going to take some time to roll out, so I think we need to become aware of it, but I think we need to not lose focus on our current working documents if we need them. Okay. One of the things...
I was going to add one more thing in terms of another date there, actually, because Stephen referred earlier to the ECM training programme,
Yeah.
and ECM will be running a full-day event. We're not sure of the venue, are we,
It'll be
Stephen?
out.
As yet, it won't be
It'll
here.
out probably just after. It won't be here now. It'll be
Okay, but they are
bit-
running a full-day event for Sheffield schools on the 23rd of November, when hopefully this new system will have been populated with your data and you can go through it in a more meaningful way. So if you'd like to put that date, it's not there, but it is a definite date. The 23rd of November, if you'd like to put that in your diary, and it's a full day event, and there will be lots of places on that ECM course. Do you want to mention?
Yeah, and then this bit here, what we've also done is set the dates for the sessions that we do just before we break up to share the city and the locality data as we did last year. Okay, so that will be us, it will be Kate or the past team as we did last year. About a week after the data comes out, to say, right, okay, this is what the city picture looks like, these are the big lessons that we can see initially, this is what your locality data looks like, just as we did last year. There isn't a cost to those briefings, we're just running those as two opportunities. You'll see that a couple of the dates do dovetail, so although if you wanted to come to that and you book quickly, you might be able to get one of the slots on the sessions that dovetail with those, so you can do both at the same time. Okay, I think there'll be about an hour gap, I think, between the two.
People will want to know about bookings, Stephen.
Yeah, so what will happen next is, I would have thought probably today, he says looking at Thomas and Maddie, or if not, possibly the day after, there'll be an email come out with all of those 6 dates on and links to Eventbrite, so you can just book onto them. There'll be about 15 schools, so we might have to have a discussion about that afterwards, available for each of these, and then this obviously will be next door, and it can be as big or as small as it needs to be. Okay.
That's it from me,
I think that's
Stephen.
us.
Yeah.
Oh, there is a short film on YouTube as well. If you have, I can't quite read it there. If you have 5 minutes and 4 seconds to spare, there is a short film on YouTube about that as well.
Well, we got 5 minutes.
Yeah, to be fair, you could miss the last 4 seconds. I thought they were really weak.
Okay, thank you, and see some of you at PLP tomorrow.
Thanks for coming. See you soon.